It was a Tuesday night, and I wasn't supposed to be home. I had been working overtime for the past 3 months, picking up extra shifts whenever I could. My wife, Lily, had been talking about wanting to move into a bigger house, start a family, typical life goals. I was doing my part to make that happen. At least, that's what I told myself. The office had been dead all day, though, and around 5 p.m., my boss told me to call it quits early. I thought about heading to a bar, maybe grabbing a beer before heading home, but something told me to just go back. I figured it would be a nice surprise for Lily, who probably didn't expect me until much later. We could have dinner together, maybe watch a movie, like we used to before things got so distant. I pulled into our driveway, and everything seemed normal enough. The porch light was on, her car was parked in the driveway, and the house looked exactly how I'd left it that morning. But as soon as I got out of my car, I noticed something off. There was a low murmur coming from the backyard. I paused for a second, listening. It wasn't loud, just voices, a man's voice and hers, muffled but close. Too close. I don't know why I walked quietly toward the back. Maybe some part of me already knew something was wrong, something that my mind wasn't quite ready to accept yet. My heart started to pound, that sinking feeling in my stomach like when you lose something valuable and you're hoping it'll turn up, but deep down, you know it's gone for good. I rounded the corner of the house and saw them through the kitchen window. Lily was sitting on one of the chairs near the back door, her legs casually draped over the side of the chair, a playful smile on her face. She was wearing one of her summer dresses, the light blue one she'd bought last year. It fit her perfectly, showing off her tanned legs, her slim waist. She looked relaxed, almost glowing. And then, there was him. Eric, our neighbor from 2 doors down. He was leaning toward her, his hand resting on her thigh, his face inches from hers. They were laughing, whispering things I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. They didn't see me. I was standing there, staring through the window like an intruder in my own life. Watching them together, so comfortable, so familiar, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I felt the world tilt under my feet, a wave of anger and disbelief crashing over me. It was like I had walked into someone else's nightmare, but it was mine. My wife. My neighbor. And I was the one on the outside, looking in. I wanted to burst through the door, to confront them right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was the realization that if I confronted them now, I'd be giving them the chance to lie, to make excuses, to cover it up. No, if I was going to expose this, I had to do it right. I had to make sure they couldn't wriggle out of this, not in front of everyone. So instead of going inside, I stepped back into the shadows, my mind racing. I knew exactly how I was going to make sure they couldn't hide this from anyone. I couldn't sleep that night. Even after leaving the backyard, walking back to the front of the house, and sitting in my car, I couldn't bring myself to go inside. It felt like the home I had been working so hard for wasn't mine anymore. Lily was still inside, probably lying in bed by now, her head on the pillow next to where I should have been. I stared at the steering wheel, replaying the image of her and Eric over and over in my head. That laugh. That look in her eyes. It wasn't the way she looked at me anymore. The worst part was, I hadn't even suspected it. Eric was just the guy next door, someone I waved to while mowing the lawn or exchanged polite small talk with when our trash bins ended up too close together. He'd helped me fix the fence between our properties last summer, the two of us working side by side, sharing beers and stupid stories like neighbors do. He was friendly, sure, but nothing more than that, or so I thought. Lily had always been the social one between the two of us. She'd chat with the neighbors while walking the dog, always striking up conversations with strangers like it was second nature. I thought that was just who she was, always so friendly and warm. I guess I didn't see the difference between friendly and something more. I eventually went inside, but I didn't wake her. I wasn't ready for the confrontation yet. Instead, I went upstairs and sat at my desk, my laptop glowing in the dark room. That's when the idea hit me. Our neighborhood had this online forum, just a small community space where people posted about lost pets, upcoming block parties, or sometimes even complaints about loud teenagers or missing packages. It was nothing fancy, but it was where the neighborhood kept its pulse. I started typing, slowly at first, my fingers trembling as I pieced together the words. I wasn't going to make this some vague, anonymous accusation. No, this was going to be very specific. By the time I was finished, the post laid everything bare, my long hours at work, the way I came home early, and what I saw through that window. I didn't hold back. I included their names, Lily and Eric, and I painted the picture clearly, so no one could misunderstand what had happened. I hovered over the post button for what felt like an eternity. Part of me was screaming not to do it, to confront them face to face like a decent person would. But then, another part of me, the part that had watched them laugh together in my own home, wanted them to feel the weight of this. They couldn't just hide behind their lies, not anymore. I hit post. The next morning, the forum was buzzing. I could see the notifications piling up, neighbors commenting, some in shock, some offering condolences, others already jumping to conclusions about who had known or suspected something. There were even a few messages from people saying they'd seen Lily and Eric together before, chatting by the fence a little too often, but they hadn't thought anything of it. I could feel the satisfaction creeping in, but it was a dark kind of satisfaction, one that came with a bitterness I wasn't ready to swallow yet. I had thrown a grenade into the quiet, suburban peace, and now there was no taking it back. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was just work. I had a habit of leaving notifications on in case something urgent came up, but when I glanced at the screen, it wasn't work at all. It was the neighborhood forum. My post from the night before had spread like wildfire, and my inbox was flooded with comments, private messages, and reactions from people all over the neighborhood. Some were outraged, others were stunned, and a few of them, well, they seemed to enjoy the drama. The comments were relentless. Are you serious? Lily and Eric? No way. I always thought there was something weird about the way they talked over the fence. Sorry to hear, man. You deserve better than this. Then there were the private messages, people reaching out with their own stories about infidelity, offering advice, or simply telling me to stay strong. It was strange, comforting, even, but it didn't change the reality of what I had done. I'd turned a private betrayal into public knowledge, and now everyone in our little suburban bubble knew what was going on behind my closed doors. I looked over at Lily. She was still asleep, her body curled under the sheets, breathing softly. It hit me all at once, she had no idea what was waiting for her outside that bedroom. I didn't know whether to feel guilty or justified. Part of me wanted her to hurt, to feel the weight of what she had done. Another part, the one that still loved her despite everything, was sick with dread. I got up quietly, not wanting to wake her yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not with everything still fresh. I went downstairs, making coffee like it was any other day, but my mind was miles away, running through what might happen next. How would Eric react? What would Lily say when she found out I had told the entire neighborhood? I could almost see the look on her face when she realized I had exposed them. Sitting at the kitchen table, staring into my cup of coffee, I thought about how this all started. A few friendly conversations between neighbors. That's how these things always begin, right? A smile, a laugh, maybe a little harmless flirting. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment it crossed a line. Was it the first time she invited him in for a drink? Or maybe when they started spending more time outside in the yard together while I was at work? I had been so focused on saving for our future that I hadn't noticed our present slipping away. Just as I was lost in thought, I heard footsteps upstairs. The house was too quiet. My heart started racing again, knowing what was coming next. Lily was up. She'd see it soon. She'd open her phone, check her messages, and realize her secret wasn't a secret anymore. A few minutes later, she came down, dressed in that same casual way that always seemed so effortless for her. Her long brown hair was still slightly messy from sleep, and she gave me a quick smile as she headed for the coffee machine. "Morning," she said, her voice soft, unaware. I watched her, not saying anything at first, just waiting. The anticipation was killing me. She grabbed her phone off the counter, sipping her coffee as she opened it. I could see her face change almost instantly. The smile faded, replaced with confusion as she started reading, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Then, her eyes widened. She froze, staring at the phone like it had just betrayed her. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of shock and fear. "What? What did you do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, watching the realization hit her. Watching her world fall apart in real time, the same way mine had the night before. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the kitchen. The silence was thick, like neither of us knew what to say first. I could see her panic building, her eyes darting back to her phone and then back at me. She was searching for words, for an explanation, or maybe an excuse, but nothing came out. She just stood there, gripping her mug, the reality of the situation sinking in. "I saw you," I finally said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I was tired, exhausted, really, from the weight of it all. "Last night, with Eric." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She didn't deny it, though. That was the thing. She could have tried to lie, to twist it, to say it wasn't what it looked like, but she didn't. Maybe she knew it was too late for that. When? She managed to ask, her voice trembling. How long have you known? I came home early, I said, my eyes locked on hers. Saw you both in the backyard, through the window. You looked comfortable. She flinched at that. Her hand trembled slightly, and she set the mug down on the counter, probably afraid she'd drop it. It's not what you think, she started, her voice barely holding together. I almost laughed. Really? Because it looked pretty clear from where I was standing. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved by them. Not this time. We were just talking. I know how it must have looked, but it wasn't. You think I'm an idiot, Lily? My voice was harsher than I intended, but I couldn't help it. The anger I'd been holding in since last night came bubbling to the surface. You think I don't know what's been going on behind my back? I saw him touch you. I saw the way you looked at him. That wasn't just talking. She looked away, wiping at her eyes, her body tense like she was preparing for the blow she knew was coming next. I didn't want it to happen. It just did. We've been distant, you and I. You're always working, always gone, and Eric. He was just there. It didn't mean anything. Her words hung in the air, hollow and empty. She had always been good with words, able to talk her way out of any argument, but this time they fell flat. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Didn't mean anything? It didn't mean anything, but you did it anyway? With our neighbor? She started crying then, real tears this time, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. My mind was spinning too fast, torn between the love I used to feel for her and the betrayal that had taken its place. I stood up, pacing the kitchen, running a hand through my hair. I posted it, I said quietly, almost to myself. She didn't understand at first. Posted what? The truth. About you and Eric. It's on the neighborhood forum. Everyone knows. Her eyes widened in horror. You didn't? I did, I said, turning to face her. You think you could just keep this between us? Hide it, pretend like nothing happened? No. Now they all know. She stared at me, her face drained of color, the tears forgotten. You posted it online? Her voice was shaking, more from shock than anger. Why would you do that? Why would you drag everyone into this? I shrugged, the numbness settling in again. Because you weren't going to own up to it. Because I wanted you to feel what it's like to have something ripped out from under you. To know that everyone around you knows what you did. She looked like she was about to collapse, her legs buckling under her. She gripped the counter for support, her breathing rapid. I watched her, feeling nothing but emptiness. The Lily I thought I knew wasn't there anymore. The woman standing in front of me, broken and panicked, was a stranger. You didn't even try to talk to me, she whispered, her voice hoarse. You just posted it? Now everyone will see me as the villain. They'll hate me. You did that yourself, I said coldly. I just made sure they knew. For a second, I thought she might scream, throw something, fight back, but she didn't. She just crumpled, sinking to the floor, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. And for the first time, I didn't feel any sympathy. I turned away from her, heading for the door. I'm going out, I said, not looking back. I needed air, space, something to clear my head. I stepped outside, the fresh air hitting me like a wave, but it didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and from the outside, our suburban life looked perfect. But now, it was all shattered. I walked down the street, my feet moving on autopilot, but my mind was still spinning. The sun was out, and the neighborhood looked just as it always did, quiet, peaceful, with kids playing in their yards and cars parked neatly in driveways. But now, beneath its surface, there was something darker. Everyone here knew what was going on behind closed doors. They just didn't talk about it. Until now. As I made my way toward the park at the end of the block, I could feel eyes on me. Passing by a couple walking their dog, I noticed them glance at each other before quickly looking away, pretending they hadn't just recognized me as that guy, the one who'd aired his dirty laundry for all to see. The neighborhood forum had done its work. My post wasn't just some anonymous confession, it had names, faces, details that made it impossible to ignore. I could already see the gossip spreading, and a part of me reveled in it. Let them talk. Let them judge. I sat down on a bench under a large oak tree, staring at the playground in the distance. The families out there, the couples with their kids, they were like a glimpse of what could have been. What I had been working toward for so long. But now, that future seemed so far away, ripped apart by a few stolen moments between my wife and our neighbor. I heard my phone buzz in my pocket, but I didn't want to look at it. I already knew it was probably more messages from neighbors, more fallout from the forum post. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled it out. Sure enough, the notifications were pouring in. I scrolled through them absent-mindedly, most of them echoing the same things: shock, sympathy, some in disbelief that Lily and Eric could have done this. But then I saw a private message from Eric. "We need to talk. Don't do this, man." I stared at it for a long time, my jaw clenching in anger. Eric had been silent up until now. No comment on the post, no attempt to explain himself, nothing. And now, after everything had already blown up, now he wanted to talk? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Without thinking, I tapped out a response. "You're lucky I haven't walked over to your house and made this physical, Eric. You had the nerve to mess with my wife in my own home, and now you want to talk? You should have thought about that before." I hit send, my heart pounding with adrenaline. Part of me wished I had gone over there, confronted him face to face instead of handling it like this. But something about exposing him this way, publicly, felt more satisfying. There was no hiding for him now, no way to sweep it under the rug or deny what had happened. Everyone around us knew, and there was no coming back from that. I leaned back on the bench, staring up at the branches above me. The leaves rustled in the breeze, the world carrying on as if nothing had changed, but for me, everything was different now. I thought about what Lily had said that morning, about how things between us had grown distant. Maybe she wasn't wrong about that. I had been working non-stop, pushing myself harder and harder for a future we had both dreamed of. But while I was busy building that future, she had found comfort somewhere else. My phone buzzed again, another message from Eric. This time, his tone was different. "I'm sorry, okay? I never wanted this to happen. Please, just talk to me before you make things worse." I stared at the message, the apology ringing hollow. He didn't want this to happen? He didn't want to be caught, that's what he meant. If I hadn't come home early that night, he would have gone on enjoying his little secret, thinking he could have both his wife and his neighbors. I was about to put the phone away when a new notification popped up, a post on the forum. Someone had responded to my original post, but this one was different. It wasn't just a reaction or a comment. It was from Eric's wife. "I don't even know where to begin. I'm so sorry this happened. I had no idea. But I guess that makes two of us." Her message was brief, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. She knew now too. I hadn't thought much about her in all of this. She and Eric had always seemed like the perfect couple, 2 kids, a nice house, the whole package. She was friendly in that distant way suburban neighbors tend to be, but we never really spoke beyond the usual small talk. Now, her world was crashing down, just like mine had. Suddenly, I didn't feel quite so victorious anymore. The fallout wasn't just hitting Lily and Eric. It was spreading, reaching people who had no part in this, people who were just trying to live their lives like the rest of us. I sat there for a long time, wondering what she must be going through right now, reading about her husband's betrayal on a public forum for all her friends and neighbors to see. I thought I'd feel better after posting it. I thought the satisfaction of exposing them would make it hurt less. But as I sat there on that park bench, watching the world continue on without me, I realized something. The pain was still there, and now, it was everywhere. I walked back home slowly, feeling the weight of everything crashing down around me. The initial rush of exposing Lily and Eric had faded, and in its place was a heaviness I hadn't expected. The post had done its job, everyone in the neighborhood knew now. But as I passed the houses, seeing the curtains twitch and the occasional glance from neighbors, I realized that the gossip wasn't just about them anymore. Now, I was part of the story too. When I got back to the house, Lily was no longer in the kitchen. The place felt eerily quiet, like a storm had passed through and left everything in disarray. I stood by the doorway for a moment, listening, but all I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator. She was probably upstairs, hiding away from the fallout she knew was coming. I checked my phone again, the notifications still piling up. Some were supportive, others not so much. The tide was turning. What had started as shock and sympathy was now becoming something else, judgment. People were beginning to ask questions, wondering why I had chosen to handle it the way I did. There were comments accusing me of going too far, of dragging our personal problems into the public eye for everyone to dissect. "This should have stayed between you and her. I get you're angry, but did you really need to air it out like that? Public humiliation isn't going to fix this." They were right, of course, but in the heat of the moment, I hadn't cared. I'd wanted everyone to know what they had done. I'd wanted them to feel the shame of being exposed. But now, I was starting to see the other side of it. The neighbors who had once smiled and waved at me were now looking at me differently, like I had become part of the scandal I'd created. I heard a knock at the door, and my stomach tightened. I wasn't ready for visitors, but I knew ignoring it wouldn't make them go away. Reluctantly, I opened the door, and there she was, Eric's wife, standing on my front porch, her face pale and drawn. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept since the news broke. In her hand was a crumpled tissue, and I could see her fingers trembling as she clutched it. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked past me without making eye contact, her steps slow and heavy. We stood there for a moment in the living room, the tension between us thick and uncomfortable. She didn't sit down, and neither did I. "I saw your post," she said, her voice cracking slightly. I don't understand. How did this happen?" Her question hit me hard. She wasn't angry, not like I would have been in her shoes. She just looked devastated, lost in the wake of everything she'd just learned. I wasn't sure what to say. How do you explain something like this to someone whose life has been turned upside down overnight? "I didn't know," I said quietly. "I came home early last night and saw them together." She closed her eyes for a moment, her shoulders shaking as she tried to hold back tears. "I never thought. I never suspected." Her voice wavered, and she wiped her eyes with the tissue. "He said he was working late, just like you." I didn't question it. I should have, but I didn't. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? We were both victims here, blindsided by the people we trusted most. We stood in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. Finally, she looked up at me, her expression hardening. "I don't know what you were trying to accomplish by posting that," she said, her voice stronger now. "But all you've done is make this mess public. My kids are going to hear about this. My friends, my family. Everyone. And now, I have to figure out how to pick up the pieces." Her words stung, but I couldn't argue with her. She was right. In my rage, I hadn't thought about the ripple effect, about how many people would be hurt by this. It wasn't just me and Lily anymore. It was Eric's wife, their kids, everyone around us. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling hollow as they left my mouth. She shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Sorry doesn't fix this." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving me standing there in the middle of my living room, alone again. That night, the silence in the house was deafening. I didn't know where Lily was, she hadn't come downstairs since the morning, and I wasn't about to go looking for her. The weight of the day pressed down on me, heavier than ever. I thought back to all the hours I'd spent working, the time I'd lost with her, the slow drift that had brought us to this point. And then I thought about the post, about how quick I had been to hit send without thinking about the consequences. Maybe I had wanted revenge, or maybe I just wanted to make sure they couldn't pretend anymore. But now, I wasn't so sure if I had done the right thing. The fallout was spreading, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. The next morning, the house felt different. Heavier. The air was thick with everything that hadn't been said, everything that had happened over the past 2 days. Lily was still upstairs, or at least, I assumed she was. I hadn't seen her since our confrontation in the kitchen. Part of me didn't want to. I wasn't ready for whatever conversation would come next. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, wondering if I should delete the post. Maybe it was too late for that now. The damage had been done. Eric's wife had been right. By airing everything out so publicly, I'd made things harder for all of us. The shame wasn't just on Lily and Eric anymore, it was on me too. I couldn't go back and change it, but I wasn't sure how to move forward, either. As I scrolled through the neighborhood forum again, I saw that the post had continued to gain traction. People were still talking, still commenting. But now, instead of just sympathy, there was a lot of finger-pointing, people choosing sides, making assumptions about what kind of marriage we had, about what kind of person I was for handling it the way I had. This is why you don't air your dirty laundry in public. Maybe if he'd paid more attention to his wife, this wouldn't have happened. Dragging your wife through the mud isn't the answer. You're no better than she is. The comment stung more than I expected. I had been so caught up in my anger, in the need to expose the affair, that I hadn't thought about how it would reflect on me. Now, instead of feeling like I had control, like I had gotten some kind of justice, I felt exposed. Vulnerable. Just as I was considering taking the post down, my phone buzzed with another notification, a new message, this time from Eric. I didn't want to read it, but I couldn't help myself. I opened it, bracing for whatever excuse or apology he had cooked up this time. You've made your point. You've ruined my family, my marriage, everything. I know I deserve it, but I just need you to stop. Please. I stared at the message, my hands gripping the phone tightly. He was desperate now, begging me to stop the fallout from spreading any further. But it was too late for that, wasn't it? The damage was done. He had destroyed my marriage, and now his was falling apart too. Part of me felt satisfied by that. But another part, one I wasn't ready to confront, felt hollow. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. My heart sank. I didn't need any more confrontations, not now. I stood up slowly, half expecting to see Eric on my doorstep, maybe to finally settle this face to face. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Eric. It was Lily. She stood there, her face pale and tired, her eyes red from crying. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of everything had crushed the life out of her. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, almost unbearable. I'm leaving, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was somewhere past me, lost in the distance. I packed a bag. I'll stay with my sister for a while. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to ask her why, to make her stay and explain herself, to force her to confront what she had done. But another part of me felt like this was inevitable. There wasn't much left to say between us. The trust had been shattered, the betrayal too deep. We had become strangers living under the same roof, and this, her leaving, felt like the final step in that process. I don't know what to say, I finally managed, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. There's nothing left to say, she replied, her eyes still avoiding mine. You were right to be angry. I betrayed you. I destroyed what we had. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't just her fault, that maybe I'd played a part in it too. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. She walked by me, her movements slow, like every step was weighted with regret. I watched her go, feeling an emptiness settle into my chest. As she reached the door, she paused, her hand resting on the handle. I never wanted this, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't mean for it to happen. And then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. After she left, I sat back down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where she had been standing. The house felt colder now, emptier. I picked up my phone again, staring at the neighborhood forum, at the post that had caused so much chaos. Without thinking, I clicked on it, and after a moment of hesitation, I deleted it. It didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and nothing I did now would change what had happened. The post had served its purpose, but it hadn't made me feel any better. It hadn't fixed anything. All it had done was expose our dirty secrets to the world, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. I sat there for a long time, the quiet of the house pressing in around me. Outside, the neighborhood was still. Perfect, on the surface. Just like it always had been. But now, I knew the truth. There were cracks in the facade, secrets hidden behind closed doors. And mine was out there for everyone to see. What would you do if your partner was having an affair with someone right next door? Would you confront them, or would you expose them to everyone?